And now I have Jason Greenblatt. He is the former White House Middle East envoy for former President Donald Trump. He was the architect of the Abraham Accords, and he's now a senior director at the Arab Israel Diplomacy at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. And he also, by the way, is the author of the book In the Path of Abraham, which chronicles the path to the Abraham Accords, which is available at any bookstore or at Amazon. Jason, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to speak to you.
I appreciate you doing this. It's always kind of contentious, the Middle East, so there's never a happy moment, it seems. But I sent you the YouGov Arab News poll that marks the 75th anniversary of the Nakba, which found that the majority of Palestinians don't have any faith in their leadership's ability to strike a peace agreement. But it also found that most Palestinians don't even identify with either Fatah nor Hamas. Do these findings surprise you at all?
Well, the first one certainly doesn't. There are some things in the poll I obviously disagree with, given my perspective as a Jew, as a proud Israel supporter, as a friend to Palestinians, as a friend to many Arab countries. But that specific issue doesn't surprise me. I think the Palestinians, they're very smart. They realize that their leadership has failed them. The leadership in Gaza, who I view as terrorists, just subjugate the Palestinians, the nearly 2 million Palestinians who live there, who suffer because of that leadership. And the leadership in what I would call Judea and Samaria, what your viewers and listeners probably call the West Bank, or something else that I wouldn't say. I think they recognize that they've been failed. They have a terrible economy. Their lives just continue to get worse and worse. There's no road to peace. There's no road to a better future.
Well, when we go back to the poll, they don't have any confidence in their leadership. They don't have any faith in the ability to reach a peace accord. What choice, though, do you think the Palestinians have? Is it not like it's not like they have a upcoming an election where Fatah and Hamas have garnered so much power that it's almost impossible there would be any other leadership emerging. It doesn't seem like they have a choice moving forward for them in their own community.
No, it is very unfortunate for them. I speak to my Palestinian friends constantly about this. So, of course, those in Gaza really have no choice whatsoever. Anytime they pick their head up and try to say something, it's a disaster for them. Those in the West Bank obviously have it better. I mean, the freedom to speak is much more limited than it would be for me as an American, for you, but they can definitely say certain things. But at the same time, it becomes challenging for them with their friend group. It becomes challenging for them socially. It becomes challenging for them business wise. So they are in a very tough spot. That said, President Abbas is quite elderly. He's in his 80s. He seems to be quite healthy. I know there always are scares, how long will he remain in office? Nobody really knows that. But my hope, and the hope of most of my Palestinian friends, is at some point there will be new leadership. President Abbas will eventually step aside. And then the question becomes, will it be leadership that's pragmatic, that wants a better future for the Palestinians, that could lead them to something that they deserve and that's incredible? Or will it be the same old as it's been for over 7 decades of missed opportunities, of corruption, of inability or just complete lack of interest in improving their economy, even while not giving up on what they view as the Palestinian cause? Nobody knows the answer to that, but I'm a big believer in hope.
The Arab News YouGov poll found that many Palestinians, of course, blame the Israelis for provocations that as the main reason. And then it seemed the second problem they blame for all this is that the U.S. has a bias. And I think when you look at it further, it says that in the third place, it's mistakes of their leadership. Do you think that the Israeli leaders have some of the blame in all this, as some of the Palestinians think?
I think to some degree, one could argue that effectively, but I don't agree. The poll, suggested that a right-wing government in Israel, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, would not be capable of achieving peace. Look, Benjamin Netanyahu and I think alike in terms of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but I will tell you that under the right circumstances, with all of the right positions being discussed and negotiated, he is a man who could achieve peace. But it's not going to be the peace that the Palestinian leadership and so many others around the world had promised the Palestinians for over 70 years. If the Palestinians can understand that and sit down at the table in a meaningful, good faith manner, I think a right-wing government is actually the kind of government that can achieve peace.
Do you think the U.S. is biased towards Israel?
So I'll answer it a little bit differently. I wrote about this in my book. There is no such thing as an honest broker. The U.S. is biased for U.S. interests. Whether those U.S. interests mean that they're biased towards Israel, yes, I would argue that, although we've given as a country billions and billions of dollars to Palestinians. And depending on the president, in this case, I'll speak about the Biden administration, there are many policies that President Biden has effectuated, and President Barack Obama, before President Trump, have effectuated towards the Palestinians, where I would say we were biased towards the Palestinians. But there are very few countries in the world, at least countries that play on the big stage, who are not biased towards one side or the other, but again, looking through the lens of that country's side. I noticed in this YouGov poll, it was a very interesting finding that many Palestinians believe Russia could play an outsized role in this, a good role. Let's think about that. Russia, with the war in Ukraine, and most people are against what Russia is doing in Ukraine, the attacks, the invasion, the death and the destruction. If that's the country that they're relying on for peace, I don't think we have a prayer, a shot at all of achieving peace. They speak about China. Well, look, reluctantly, I'll congratulate China for what they've achieved between Saudi Arabia and Iran. We'll see how that goes. We'll see where that goes. But, they played an effective role, and perhaps they can play a role in terms of Israeli-Palestinian peace. But most people would agree that it's the United States and the United States alone that could truly play a role in achieving a comprehensive peace between Israel and the Palestinians, if, it's a really important word here, if one is achievable at all.
Is it possible that China could do that with the Palestinians and the Israelis, or do you feel that it has to remain with the United States?
Well, I never want to say never, but the dynamic is a bit different. China has a really important role with Iran, a tremendous amount of power with Iran, which means they were able to bring the Iranian regime to Saudi Arabia in a way that most countries in the world could not, especially given China's now world power stature. They also play an important role with Saudi Arabia. They're a huge consumer of Saudi Arabian oil. So they came onto the playing field with a tremendous power, a tremendous goodwill, tremendous trust. They don't have that with the Palestinians. There's very little that they do with the Palestinians. And I don't want to say they don't have that with Israel. China is an important partner of Israel. So maybe they have some role to play, but I think the circumstances are quite different.
And I know that when I go back to the issue of Palestinians not feeling comfortable that the U.S. is fair, do you think that the Trump administration may have kind of fueled that to be even worse than it was? I mean, as you pointed out, Obama, they felt might have been a little fairer. Do you think Trump was fair, or do you think that his policies like moving the embassy to Jerusalem kind of undermine that ability to get the confidence of both sides to come to the peace table?
So I could certainly understand the Palestinian perspective on that, but the reality is they're looking at it from the wrong direction. They need to look at it from what U.S. policy is. So if you want to speak about the embassy and the recognition of Jerusalem, what they forget is that under U.S. law, under multiple administrations in the United States, Congress passed back in the 90s, Congress passed a bipartisan, almost wholly supported law that said Jerusalem is the undivided capital of Israel, and we should move the United States embassy. That's in the interest of the United States. That's what Congress wanted. But it took one president, President Trump, who was willing to actually not sign these national security waivers in order to follow U.S. law. So one could argue that that was something that was anti-Palestinian or too pro-Israel. But at the end of the day, however good or bad those arguments are, President Trump was following U.S. law. And I would also argue that he was being truthful to history, that Jerusalem is important to Jews. It's historically been their capital for over 2,000 years. It's a city that has always been a Jewish city. That doesn't mean that Al-Aqsa doesn't exist. That doesn't mean Arabs don't live in Jerusalem. That doesn't mean that I argue that it isn't important to Palestinians and to Arabs and to Muslims and, of course, to Christians generally. I accept all that. But when you think about it and you listen, for example, to President Abbas's speech at the United Nations on what the Palestinians call Nakba Day, where he denies the connection between Jews and Jerusalem and Jews in the Temple Mount, you realize that President Trump simply acknowledged truth and fact and history. President Abbas denies history, fabricates history, outright lies in the halls of the United Nations. So I think people look at it, or should look at it, differently. It's not anti-Palestinian. It's not pro-Israel. It's more U.S. policy, what's good for the U.S. and the truth.
So the criticism is this denial that Jews have no ties to Jerusalem. That seems a little way out there too. I agree, but the fact that you do recognize that everybody does have a tie there. I mean, even my own family, centuries lived in Jerusalem, and we're Christian Palestinian. But so you do recognize that everybody has some footing in Jerusalem, some right to be there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And really, what people overlook about President Trump is if you listen or read the speech that he gave in December of 2017 rather, where he recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Look at the very end of the speech. This was such important language where he spoke about the ties of all the major religions to Jerusalem, to the Temple Mount, Al-Aqsa, to what Muslims call the Noble Sanctuary. And his view was he wants to see Jewish kids and Muslim kids and Christian kids respecting those holy sites, and others respecting the fact that it is holy to all these world religions. We didn't argue with that. Whereas President Abbas and others like him argue about the Jewish connections, perhaps the Christian connections, but they generally use that to their advantage in terms of their arguments. But they argue about the Jewish connections to Jerusalem all the time.
Now, you played a major role in Abraham Accords. I described as the architect, and in fairness, there were other people helping you. But I think when we think of the Abraham Accords, I think of you, because it was a plan that was spelled out pretty well. But when you read the poll, it doesn't seem like a majority of the Palestinians feel that it was positive, that it was a good move, and they even seem to suggest that it may have encouraged Israel to be more aggressive towards them. How do you react to that?
Well, first of all, I was lucky to be part of an amazing team, President Trump, Jared Kushner, David Friedman, Avi Berkowitz, so many others, and great leadership in the Middle East who helped us, who really created the Abraham Accords. I would say that this is one of the biggest misses of the Palestinian side and the Palestinian people. Imagine what could happen if they embraced the Abraham Accords, the business that they could do, the economy, how it could improve. They need to separate their political aspirations, their negotiations, with their economy. It's one of the biggest mistakes that the Palestinian leadership has made over the decades. They could improve their economy, they could make lives better, they could allow so many people to have jobs if they didn't allow themselves to be blocked by their political leanings. Think about it. Palestinians speak Arabic, many of them speak Hebrew, they're very smart, they're very talented. Imagine that they could be the glue to the Abraham Accords, even while there's no peace deal between Israel and the Palestinians. And eventually, hopefully, one day there will be. But to walk away from it and stay, it was, as the late Saeb Erekat said, that it was a stab in the back of the Palestinian people by an Arab dagger. That's the worst thing you could say, and the worst thing you could do for the Palestinian people, in particular, because these Arab countries have given billions of dollars to help the Palestinian cause.
Go ahead.
Sorry, just to answer your question, yeah. I don't think it's caused Israel to be more aggressive with the Palestinians. I think when Israel is aggressive, it's because they have fear of being attacked, or they are being attacked. I don't think that they're tying the Abraham Accords to their state of aggression. It so happens that, as is always the case, there's ebbs and flows of violence. Right now, we're going through a very, very bad time of violence, of terrorism, and that causes Israel to be more aggressive. But I don't think Israel is being more aggressive because of the Abraham Accords.
Do you think it's fair that for them to say, though, that this new government has been a little further to the right, and some of the new restrictions, like you couldn't wave a Palestinian flag, or stepped up increase in the number of settlements? Isn't that kind of provocative, or is that more of a reaction to what you think is the environment there?
I definitely think it's much more of a reaction to the environment. I do think the government is more right-wing. There are certainly some ministers in the government who say things that shouldn't be countenanced. I think that They say hateful things, and I don't agree with them. But I think as a whole, the government is trying very hard under challenging circumstances, even having nothing to do with the Palestinians. You have the judicial reform protests, you have all sorts of things going on in Israel. It's a challenging time. And I think that I think the view is that this right-wing government is very bad for the Palestinians. I think a certain portion of this right-wing government is, two ministers in particular, and I'm against those statements that some of those ministers have made. And I don't think that people should be focusing on it because I don't think it's what the Netanyahu government as a whole thinks.
When you look at the results of the Abraham Accords, have they been as successful as you thought they would be?
I think between Israel and the UAE, it certainly has been an enormous success and it will continue to grow. I think between Israel and Bahrain and Israel and Morocco, there's still a lot of work to do, not because the people don't want it and don't support it, but I think it just takes time for things to go through the system. And I think we're going to see some really excellent things coming out of those relationships as well. As far as whether it's reduced conflict in the region generally, I mean, this is one of the keys to the whole Abraham Accords, which is to say the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not the core conflict of the region. It might have been decades ago. It hasn't been for many decades already. And the Abraham Accords wasn't designed to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It wasn't designed to resolve what's the terrible, tragic civil war in Syria. It wasn't designed to resolve the terrible situation in Lebanon. I mean, Lebanon is essentially occupied by the Iranian regime, and this beautiful country of Lebanon is left with almost nothing. It wasn't designed to resolve Yemen. So I think people put more weight and responsibility on the Abraham Accords than is appropriate. It did bring down some tension. It can bring down more tension. But at the end of the day, there are lots of conflicts in the Middle East having nothing to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and that remain challenging and will be very difficult to resolve.
What would you say, though, that the Abraham Accords were designed to achieve?
What they were designed to achieve is friendship, warmth, business, diplomatic relationships between countries that recognize that Israel is part of the community there. Israel can be a tremendous ally and friend. Both sides can benefit from each other. This is not about Israel getting tons of money from the Gulf. It wasn't ever about that. It isn't about the Gulf getting all sorts of security items from Israel, though there's certainly some benefit to that. It was designed to show that the time has come to recognize that Israel is their neighbor, can be a good friend, ally, partner. And I think we have seen a lot of that and we'll continue to see much more. Can it be used to bring more countries in? Sure. Could it be used to help Palestinians if the Palestinians were willing to let that happen? Sure. But it wasn't designed and really has little to do with resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict other than maybe as a model.
And I know that I was at the Peace to Prosperity conference that they had in Bahrain. I was probably one of the only Palestinians. There were a couple there. I know I was the only Palestinian journalist covering it. But do you think that that in proposing it, that the Trump administration didn't anticipate how negative the Palestinians would react to it, or was there an assumption? I mean, when I talk to other Palestinians, they'll say this, oh, they never really wanted us there. It was designed to keep us out. Did Trump not do enough, or do you think did the Palestinians just make these false assumptions about what it was supposed to do?
Yeah, I'm there. I'm 100% that they made false assumptions. I mean, they boycotted the event. They rejected anyone who wanted to go. A few Palestinians were able to go. Some were arrested when they came back from the conference, which was just such a mistake. We understood that this is their position. They don't want us to help them with their economy. It was, as you could imagine, working in the White House on such a complex conflict, I had many frustrating moments, but the most frustrating, I shouldn't say the most, among the most frustrating was the Palestinian leadership inability and unwillingness to help us help them with their economy. What they also failed to realize is US taxpayers, not always under President Trump, because he did cut much of the aid to the Palestinians, but US taxpayers foot so many of the bills that the Palestinians have to pay with billions and billions of dollars. It was our job in the White House to use American taxpayer money wisely. If we could improve the Palestinian economy, even if the conflict is going on, and use less US taxpayer money to help people who deserve to be helped, meaning Palestinians, we're going to do that even if the Palestinian leadership throws a temper tantrum and tries to undermine us. It's not about the Palestinians' leadership's poor decisions. It's about helping the Palestinian people in a way that makes sense for the United States of America.
Did Trump really do enough? Did you and Kushner do enough to really engage them in that conference?
One of my tasks was to do that, but when the leadership closes the door, this is what happens. I'll give you another example. After my time at the White House, there was a tech conference being hosted in Israel. And I was able to secure tickets for the tech conference because I wanted my Palestinian friends to come there and make connections, try to do business, grow with what they're trying to do for themselves, because some of them were incubating young companies. And of the 40 tickets or 50 tickets I secured, I was able to get only 6 or 8 Palestinians to come. Why? Because they were afraid. They were afraid of what would happen back home with their leadership. So we try every which way. I still try. I hope to continue to try. My door is always open to Palestinians, any which way I could help, but it is very challenging with the leadership in place.
All right. My guest, Jason Greenblatt, he was the former White House Middle East envoy under former President Donald Trump, the architect of the Abraham Accords, and he's now senior director of the Arab Israel diplomacy at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. He's also the author of the book, In the Path of Abraham, which chronicles the path to the Abraham Accords, which is available at many bookstores and on Amazon. Jason, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Good to see you.